All right, here we go. I've got it now. So thanks for tuning in. We're discussing John's Gospel. And so we're on our second lesson. So that's chapter 2. And the verse that I think stands for the whole gospel, John 21:24. This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things, and we know his testimony is true. So there's our summary, I think, of what John was relating to us. The first thing I want to present to you tonight is a little bit of geography. This is the map that I showed you last time. And if you recall, I talked about how to orient yourself on this map if you're not familiar with it, but the big blue portion to the west is the Mediterranean. You locate that with a very smooth coastline there in that region. And then you locate the Dead Sea, or in this map, the Salt Sea. And then the river that connects that and the Sea of Galilee is the Jordan. But if you locate the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea and the River Jordan, you're pretty well located. The places that are of interest tonight, of note tonight, we're going to be talking about Cana in Galilee and Capernaum in Galilee and Jerusalem. So first, catch Jerusalem. That's just a little bit to the west off the northern tip of the Dead Sea. Here's Jerusalem. And then on the next slide, I'm going to blow up this region in red. And here we see, you could see Cana in Galilee. Here, it's due west of the Sea of Galilee. And Capernaum is on the coast, on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. So these places, Capernaum and Cana, are going to figure in prominently tonight. We talked last time in our introduction in first chapter about the characteristics of John's gospel, and we said that John omitted much that the synoptics contain. I guess that's the bad news, but the good news is he includes much that is not contained in the other three gospels. We note that his style is very different than the other three gospels, and it's largely independent of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John didn't leave us guessing about his purpose. He wrote in what could have been the close of the book. As I mentioned before, I think chapter 21 was an afterthought, an addendum. But chapter 20 closes with him saying, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." So that's the purpose of his gospel. Let me go ahead and go to the next slide. Still a review. This was the macro outline of John's gospel. He gives us a long prologue, verses 1 through 18 of chapter 1. And then really the heart or the meat of the book would be Jesus disclosing himself in the words that he teaches and the deeds that he performs. Chapters 11 and 12 are his transition, and we could call maybe those life and death. Chapters 13 through 20, his self-disclosure through the cross, and then his exaltation or resurrection. And then, as we said, an epilogue, an addendum, chapter 21. I'm just going quickly through our review and the review of the introduction. Last time, after the prologue, we saw that John the Baptist interacted with Jesus, and then he witnessed Jesus as the Spirit came upon him and he was baptized. We saw Jesus choose his first two disciples, and then pick two more disciples in the 51 verses of the first chapter. All right, so that brings us to the first part of chapter 2, and that's going to be the wedding at Cana of Galilee. So to get us started, who will read for us verses 1 through 5 of chapter 2?
I'll be glad to.
Okay, Bill?
Okay. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." 1 through 5, is
Okay.
that it?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's it. That's it. Good. Uh-huh. So on the third day, it says, give us a little bit of chronology. It says there just happened to be a wedding, and he happened to go, and his mother happened to go as well. So, did Jesus go to social events? Evidently, he did. He went to this one, and um, something happened there in verse 3. The wine ran out, and so just an incident, I guess, that occurred, but it's of note because it leads to the first miracle that Jesus is going to perform. Do you recall from our summary last time how many miracles John records for us?
6.
The other gospels record a lot of them, 50 or more. It's 7, really. I think 7, Bill.
Oh, okay.
But then his resurrection too. But mainly he records 7 of them, so he's very selective. And this is going to be the first one. It says that his mother brought the problem to him. They have no wine. And it sounds like Jesus pushes back a little bit. I guess there's an implication in there, do something about it. And he says, woman, what does this have to do with me? This, I'm just a guest here. Why are you bringing this up? And then he says, my hour has not yet come. And so it sounds like it wasn't time to start the miracles. It sounds like maybe Jesus was waiting and was going to do something different in a different day, in a different way. He says it's not yet time for this. But his mother says to the servants, and this just is so interesting in a family dynamic kind of way. She says to the servants, do whatever he tells you, as though, she knows something's going to happen. Go ahead, Bill.
Uh, it it indicates to me a couple of things. It indicates to me that if he hadn't performed any miracles yet, Mom must have known something special. She must have known something was going on, because she's pretty much saying to him, "Go fix that." And Jesus is saying,
Yeah.
"Don't bother me, Mom. I'm busy." but but I think she must. I think there's an implication there that she, if she had not actually seen a miracle, knew that he was special. I mean, every mom thinks their kid's special, but I mean, really special.
Well, um, let's see. There's a passage. Yeah, here I found it. It's in Luke chapter 2 and verse 51. Luke 2 and 51. This is after they went when he was 12 years old and worshiped in the temple and got part of the way home and realized he wasn't with them anymore. They had to go back and get him. And they were, kind of upset with him, but he said, didn't you know I had to be about my father's business? And then it says, after that scenario in verse 51, he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. So, yeah, she's been the witness to his life. She's been watching all, she knew about his conception, she knew about his birth, she knew about all the wonderful things that had happened to date. And so she knows pretty well he's different. And yeah, just watch him. And if he wants you to do anything, do it. It's really, I think it's just very touching how this this comes on. Now, let me ask you a question before we go on. We're going to go on in verse 6, but here's a question. Do you think Jesus planned to perform this miracle this day?
I don't.
I don't think so. Do you see where he says, "My time has not yet come"? I don't think he planned. I don't think he planned to perform that miracle. All right, who can read
Yeah, but
for
if the
us
Holy
verse?
One is all, but if the Holy One is all knowing and all seeing and all
That's
loving,
right.
then
Yeah,
maybe so.
maybe. Let's go and see. Verses 6 through 11. Who could read that for us?
Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for communal washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, I'll fill the vats with, he said, fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine in the first, and then the cheaper wines after the guests have had enough to drink. But you have saved the best till now. Is that far enough?
One more.
What Jesus did here in Cana in Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him.
All right. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, in my translation, it says that they bring out the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink.
Right. Yeah.
Not enough
Yeah.
to drink, but too much.
You start them off with the good stuff, and then when nobody's paying any attention anymore, then you slip the bad stuff out and they don't care. So he says that's the way people normally do it, but now you've done the opposite. So this speaks to the quality of what Jesus did. And the quality was exceptional. The quality was exceptional. So let me ask you another question on this one. Do you why do you think he did this miracle for these people that day?
Well, can you hear me?
We can, Joe, go ahead.
Okay. I honestly believe he did it for his disciples. Of course, he did it
Okay.
for his mother without a doubt. And but I believe he did it for his disciples.
That makes sense. He did it because the disciples were the ones who kind of saw what was going on. You
Mhm.
notice that the master of the feast, and I guess that would be the coordinator. We call him a wedding coordinator now, right? The master of the feast didn't know where the wine came from. He just knew about the quality. Kind of surprised him that it was there, and he noticed the quality was very good, but he didn't know where it came from, so he couldn't be impressed, and he really couldn't believe because he wasn't in on it. But The servants knew, and the disciples knew. I think there's another idea here, why he did this. I think he just was in a place where there was a problem, there was a need, and his mother asked him to, and he just did what he could do. He just helped. I think it's a very simple explanation. He could do something, and they needed something, and he did something. And I really think this might have a lesson for us. You got to ask the question. John only put 7 miracles in here. Why do you think he put this one in? And I think it speaks to the power of prayer. Now when we ask, Jesus is removed from the situation, but there was a situation where his mother kind of asked for some help, and it wasn't in his plan, I don't think, but she asked, and so that was what they did that day. And I think it speaks to his response to a prayer. What about your thoughts on it? Go ahead, Bill.
Well, we were at a wedding one time where they ran out of food and they ran out of beverages, and the room was too small for the number of people that were there. And the bride was beautiful, the groom was handsome, but that's not what people talked about. They talked about the fact that they ran out of food, that the room was hot. So you lost all the joy of that situation because the people, all they thought about was a negative. Well, maybe that's part of Jesus's plan there. Is he's trying to save the bride and groom and the parents of the bride and groom from being embarrassed. Just a
Yeah,
simple little act of kindness. Hey, I'll fix this for you. I wasn't planning
I
to, but I'm gonna fix you up.
yeah, I think this speaks to kindness. Just being kind, just doing something to help. And I wonder sometimes what he might have planned as his first miracle, but this is the one that he did first because they needed some help that day, and he was there and he could do something. And maybe we want his actions to be grand and glorious, and sometimes they were, but here he's just being a nice guy. He's just helping. And
It gives us a lesson too. It tells us that we can ask for little things. I
it
mean,
does.
and that's really important. It helps to develop that conversation with God. And I
It
think that's
does.
really important.
That's right. Now, the next two verses are kind of helping us move along. He was in Cana of Galilee, but then in verse 12, it says, after this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. Now, again, I'm reading from the English Standard Version. I don't know if your translations have something different than his brothers, but this identifies that Jesus has some brothers, and we'll have other references to them in John's Gospel. We're going to talk about them some more. But remember the map. Capernaum's on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and he's going to spend a lot of time there. But here's just a travel notice: he goes that way. Now, the next verse is more traveling. In verse 13, the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And sometimes when we say north and south, we talk about going up or going down. But I think when they have references of going down or going up, it's referring to altitude. Jerusalem was up high. Capernaum was on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. I think Cana must have been above in altitude, above the Capernaum, and so that's why they went down to Capernaum and they went up to Jerusalem. But I want to draw your attention to something here. We usually talk about Jesus' public ministry being a little over 3 years. And I don't know if you know how we get that, but we get that from John. John's the one who helps us. You notice here in verse 13, it mentions that the Passover was at hand. Now, let me show you this diagram here. This is a timeline from about 26 AD to 30 AD. We think Jesus was on the cross in 30 AD. There's some debate about that, but John's the one that tells us about some Passovers. And in John 2:23 or 13, it is, he mentions the Passover. And in John 5:1, it doesn't specifically say Passover, but it says feast. And we kind of think that was a Passover. And then in John 6:4, it does mention another Passover. And then we know towards the end of his ministry, towards his crucifixion, there was a Passover then. And that's mentioned in John 13 and verse 1. So we've got 4 Passovers mentioned in John. And that's what gives us the space of 3 years for his public ministry. And so John helps us there for the timeline for this.
But it was
All
the
right.
Passover, was Passover an annual festival?
Yes, it was. It was an annual festival. It was supposed to have been kept all the way from the time before the children of Israel came out of Egypt, just before the 10th plague was when they celebrated it the first time with Moses. And time-wise there, 1250, 1300 BC, something like that. It was supposed to have been celebrated right up here until 30 AD, when Jesus fulfilled the Passover, and it didn't need to be celebrated anymore. Christ became our Passover. So 1300 years, say, it should have been celebrated every year. Who can read for us verses 14 through 17?
I can read it,
I'll
Jeff.
go ahead, David.
14 through 17. In the temple courts, he found men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple area, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. How dare you turn my father's house into a market?" His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me."
So that reference I see comes from Psalm 69 and verse 9. I believe Psalm 69 is very messianic, relating to Jesus. But this is the first cleansing of the temple. We're going to see no more mentions of cleansing the temple in John's gospel. This is the only one he records. But the synoptics all mention the cleansing, the second one that was done at the end of his public ministry. And that's one place you can find that is Matthew 21, verses 12 and 13. So cleansing the temple kind of bookends Jesus' public ministry. He does it right here at the start, and he does it right at the end. And so with that, you would kind of think that one of the things he came to do was to set the practice back up right in the temple. And this is as angry, I guess you could say, as we see him get. This is as aggressive, I think, as we see him get, making a whip of cords. It sounds like he used that on the animals, not on the people, but he did overturn their tables that they were using, and he commanded them to get out of there. And he does it with scriptural background. You're not to make the Father's house a house of trade. This was in the law of Moses. It should have been kept, obeyed, but it was not being obeyed, and he took exception to it. Now, they didn't like that. Okay, they didn't like it at all. So, who can read for us verses 18 through 22? Let me
Then the
get that one.
Jews demand,
Oh,
then
you
the
got-
Jews demanded of him, what miracles, what miraculous sign can you show us to prove that your authority to do all this? Jesus answered them, destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days. And how far you want me to go, Jeff?
Through verse 22.
Okay, thank you. The Jews replied, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days? But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken.
So, the ultimate authority for what Jesus was doing and the ultimate proof of what Jesus was doing was going to be his resurrection. That is the proof. Remember from our study of the book of Acts, every time there was a sermon in the book of Acts, it mentions the resurrection. And Paul, in the Corinthian letter, First Corinthian letter, in chapter 15, talks about how all of our faith falls apart if there's no such thing as resurrection and no such thing as Jesus being resurrected. It's really central, but it is. It did happen. It does happen. Resurrection happens. And in the book of Acts, chapter 1 and verse 3, it says Jesus was declared alive after his passion by many infallible proofs. And so Jesus is referring to that ultimate proof, the resurrection, as the authority that he had for doing what he was doing. So he kind of deferred them. It was going to be years before that crucifixion and resurrection would take place, but he's already pointing to it. He knows how this is going to end, and he knows how significant the resurrection is going to be. I don't believe the Jews caught it, but it says the disciples had an aha moment and figured it out later when it happened. That's what he was talking about. Questions, comments through verse 22?
So with that comment that he made, do you think it was done with the anticipation of trying to tell them what is happening, what's going to happen in the future, and try to, like shake them up a little bit and make them think about him and what the purpose is?
Yeah, he deals with his detractors differently at different times. And here he just gives them a general prophecy. And I don't know, there are certain religions, I think, that understand Jesus was a prophet and that's all that he was. And he was a prophet, but he was more than a prophet. But here he's prophesying. He says, you're going to see me raise up this temple on the third day. And that is a prediction, I guess you could say, history told before it happens. It's another way of thinking what a prophecy is. And sometimes they're cryptic, sometimes you can't figure them out. Most prophecies are designed so or worded so that you can't predict when they're going to happen. But when that event that's referred to does happen, you can look back and say, oh, that's what he was talking about. And that's what happens for the disciples there in verse 22.
Jeff, could I say something?
Sure, Joe.
I don't know, but it seems to me that another effect of this would be Jesus would really be getting their attention. Because to me, if I was standing there And I would probably be thinking like a typical Jew. I'm looking at this temple that took 46 years to build. And I'm looking, he's saying he's going to tear that down and raise it up in 3 days. That seems to me would be controversial and probably spoken about a lot. And maybe, part of the thing that started to really get the attention on him too.
That makes sense. And you would hope that they would have been challenged by that and maybe try to figure out how it could be and how it would work.
Or just the fact that, as they said many times, you've got a demon. Okay, here's a crazy man. He said he's going to tear down this temple and build it up in 3 days. But it seems to me there'd be a lot of talk about that.
Yeah, and we're going to see the resistance to Jesus grow throughout the book of John, and we're going to have quite a time with it, chapter 8. But as far as these statements that are difficult to understand, we're going to see that in chapter 4 when he talks to the Samaritan woman at the well. And we're going to see her really struggle to figure out what he's talking about. So he will challenge people from time to time, get them to stretch, try to get them out of the rut that is their preconceptions by giving them something to chew on. And I think that's what he's doing here. One more little section here, and I really appreciate this one. I hope you will too. There's so many gems in the Gospel of John, the way he presents it. But here, verses 23 through 25, I'll read these. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them because he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man. Now that's a bit cryptic, isn't it? It's a little bit of a challenge to figure out exactly what he's talking about there. But I want you to think about what Jesus was doing in his lifetime. And I want you to also compare that to what's going on right now with our presidential election. I don't know who's going to win this thing, but the candidates are right now very interested in getting a majority to, at least specifically the majority of the Electoral College, to select them as president. For it's only if they get enough support that they will be able to serve as the way they want to serve. Jesus wasn't concerned about that at all. He was not running any kind of a campaign. And the thing that he came to do, he didn't need a majority to follow him. He didn't need even a certain number to follow him. He was going to do the work that he had to do, and it really didn't matter what humans did. Humans were going to finally betray him and get him to the cross where he would be that perfect sacrifice. But he didn't need a certain number of people to believe him. He didn't need a certain number of people to validate what he was doing. He didn't need that. If you were willing to follow him, that's great. But he kind of knew how we are as humans, and thankfully, what he was doing didn't require much of us, because we would have messed up our part, I'm sure. So this he was getting followers in verse 23. They saw the signs that he was doing, which implies that there had been already a number of other things besides that first turning water into wine at Cana in Galilee. In the first part of the chapter, he's done a lot more, and they've impressed a lot of people. But he's not counting the number of believers with the idea of winning an election or something like that. I think that's what we get out of verses 24 and 25. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, Jeff, he's speaking the truth. If he speaks the truth, it doesn't matter who believes him. He knows it's the truth.
That's right.
So there's a lot to be said. If you're a liar, people know you're a liar. I think that it because once you tell a lie, you got to tell another lie to cover it up. And after a
Yeah.
while, the lies get so big it doesn't really matter what, because anybody that listens to you knows you're lying. But Jesus was speaking the truth, and he knew he was speaking the truth. So he had, and who did he have? He had the best ally of all. He had God behind him, so or
Well,
with him, or in him, or
yeah, he could only do what his heavenly Father directed him to do. That's what he did. He did it right. He did it consistently, and so he was in the right relationship with his Father, and everything was going to be fine. It really, when it comes to our being saved, there's something we've got to do, but when it comes to his part, it really didn't depend on us, and he didn't entrust himself to his kind of an independence. I think I see in this last part of John chapter 2, a healthy separation from mankind, even though he's here and he's human. It's I don't know, a little bit separate, a little bit independent. How about questions or comments? Anything in John chapter 2? All right, so let me just review then, recap, and we'll be done for tonight. We talked about in John chapter 2 the wedding in Cana of Galilee, which is the first miracle that Jesus performed. We see him travel from Cana to Capernaum in verse 12, from Capernaum to Jerusalem in verse 13. We see the first mention of a Passover. There'll be 3 others in verse 13. We see him cleanse the temple for the first time. And then we see this little closing statement that he kind of knows what's in us and he didn't entrust himself to us. So that's what we found in John chapter 2, and kind of a shorter chapter, about half the length of the first chapter. So chapter 3 for next time, which would be a week from tonight.
same bat channel, huh?
Same bat time, same bat channel.
All right, Robin.
For those of you that are old enough to remember that reference.
Thank you
Right.
very much.
Yes, thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Yeah, Joe, I hope you can join us again.
Yep, I plan on it if all goes well.
Well, good.
Computer
All
keeps
right.
working for me.
Yeah, there you go. You're doing great.
Okay, we'll talk to you
Okay.
Friday then.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, God bless you all.
Here.
God bless you.